My name is Brock, and this is the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast. On today's episode, I talk to Todd Moonbounce. We talk about the Star Wars 5e system. We also talk about how to run combat narratively and running podcasts. And we touch a little bit on player backstories and a bunch of other little topics along the way. You can find him on Twitch, Twitter, and at dungeonjedimasters.com. If you're interested in being interviewed, be sure to join the Discord server so you can see when I post new interview slots. Also, if you're interested in trying out the Fantasy Flight Star Wars game, I'm going to be running a one-shot on Friday, November 5th at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. It'll probably be around 3 hours long, and you can sign up for that game on the Discord server. If you head over to the Scheduled Games channel, there is an event, and up to 4 people can sign up for that one-shot. And even if there are more people that sign up, it will put anybody extra on a waiting list just in case somebody backs out before the event actually happens. So for anyone interested, be sure to join the Discord server and check it out. And with that, let's jump into the episode. Welcome, everybody. I have Todd Moonbounce with me. Welcome, Todd.
Hey, Brock. Glad to be here. Looking forward to a conversation.
Yeah, glad to have you. Todd, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started in the tabletop role-playing space?
Absolutely. So I've been involved a little over 2 years now. I'd have to go back and look. It started, I wasn't a Critical Role, jump on the wagon person. That came a little later. I don't even remember what spawned my interest in it. Just came across it and started searching out. I think the first one I looked over was like Star Wars RPG, the old D6 version of it. And I threw it over to my brothers and said, hey, we should check this out. This looks fun. And that never took off, but I kept diving into it and reading various systems myself, and eventually found an online game for 5th edition and played in that for a while. And that was my first taste of it. And then found an in-person game locally back before, we couldn't have in-person games, which feels so long ago. But and that was with Star Wars 5e. So it's a fan conversion of 5th edition. And played in that in person for a while at a local game store. And shortly after that, decided to take the plunge into DMing myself. And that's kind of, my start. And just have ran with it since.
And how was your kind of initial jump into being a DM? What was that process like?
Yeah, it was, I'm trying to think of I think it was my Tempest Feud campaign. Nope, it wasn't. Let me back up. It was Living Force. So I ran that first, and I went into it and I said, all right, I ran 2 campaigns side by side. I did like a test campaign first because I was so kind of nervous, and it's like, I don't know, I want to get this right. So I had my core group, and then I invited some other players and said, hey, this is going to be maybe a 1-shot or 2. And then I ended up running these 2 campaigns, the same stories side by side. And then we had some players that just dropped, their schedules didn't work out. So it kind of worked out in the end that they all came together into one group. And so then I just took the one after a few sessions. Then that was it. And it was fun. I love being on that side of the table. You're constantly busy. You're constantly playing. And so it's great to just, have that level of activity. And then I think shortly after that, I went into, I started doing one-shot Wednesdays, as I called it, and I was running them for Star Wars 5e up to 4 times a month, once a week, just cramming in one-shots every session, just allowing anyone that wanted to come play, jump into a game, and generally the same adventure each month. So it made it a little easier on me, but just to get a lot of people in and continue growing. That was my purpose, was to just learn and grow it as a DM.
And when you're running those games, where do you typically run them online? Is there a certain set of tools that you like to use, or what is that like?
Yeah, so I started, I haven't ran anything in person. I have now, but when I started into it, it was all online. And Roll20 was my go-to at first. So everything was on that. I used that forever. And then recently, I've been on it for a bit now, but I've switched over to the Foundry virtual tabletop system, which I love. If you're familiar with that, it's great, and I use that with other games I play now with Star Wars 5e, traditional 5e, and the Savage World system, specifically Deadlands.
I have heard pretty much only good things about Foundry. And I've got a one shot coming up here in November, so I may look at just buying the license and playing with it because I think ultimately that's probably where I'll end up, so I might as well get there sooner rather than later.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. If you have experience in other VTTs like Roll20, for example, there's a little bit of a learning curve, I think, with anything. But once you get into it, it's clean, it runs well, and um, especially with some of the newer systems I've gone to, like Savage Worlds specifically, they have great publisher support, creator support for that system. They have a dedicated team, so the content is like by the company, which is really great. There is a team for Star Wars 5e unofficial, but there's a team of developers that are working on that as well. So that's what's great is just the level of the community for the platform.
And when you're running games, what is kind of your dungeon master style? How do you like to run games?
Yeah, I love a narrative game. I love to just sit back and watch my players play. I get so much enjoyment out of that and help them do that. So as an example, with my Deadlands campaign that runs bi-weekly Thursdays, I have an amazing group of players. In general, I've lucked out and I haven't really ever had a bad player, knock on wood. Overall. And but this group, I've got 4 players. I've played with them in some other things, but they're really good together, and that definitely makes a world of a difference. And so I'm able to just sit back and allow them to do their thing, and so that's what I enjoy, what I prefer, just to kind of facilitate the story that we're all telling, as needed. I enjoy the occasional combat. I'm definitely not super crunchy. I'll bring in the combat when it's time, and I enjoy those aspects. But yeah, I certainly shoot for more of that narrative storytelling type of game.
And do you try to emulate like any particular style, like action movies or anything like that? Is there a certain thing that you're pulling from?
No, I wouldn't say necessarily, because I think I don't. I wouldn't say I have a specific focus or inspiration on any one thing. I just try and be open minded about that, or pull from various experiences and references and whatnot. And of course, it depends on the setting and other aspects, of course, as well. But
And you mentioned it sounds like as the DM you feel like you just want to help your players in moments maybe where things aren't as narrative or kind of help them along so that they can continue that narrative. Can you kind of talk about how you do that or maybe an example of helping your players out?
yeah, so with that as an example, if there's, I guess an obvious one would be if there's a lull in the action. Maybe players just kind of have not found a reason to continue their conversations or the role play or whatever it is, or just helping to fill that space, whether it's throwing in an NPC to come in and say hello, maybe give them a plot line, or something happens in the world, an event, etc. Just throw in these somewhat living events. The worlds should always be living in your campaigns and going on around the players. It doesn't stop when the players stop. So if there's kind of a pause there, or it feels like it's just not going anywhere, bringing something in, and sometimes it's the littlest of things that can spark another tangent in a good way that the players can take and run with.
And how much control do you give them in the story? Like when you're doing this stuff narratively, is it mostly them kind of playing in character and talking between themselves, or do you give them a little freedom to come up with things or events that are happening in the story itself?
More that they're living in the world. They're not necessarily coming up with that as much. And I guess to preface that, most of what I've ran so far has been pre-written modules, adventures. Living Force campaign that I run on Sundays. It was an old Star Wars D20 campaign, similar to Adventures League. You'd go and show up, and you could play the module, and it's like a 5-year thing they did ongoing. And so, you have to kind of stick to that story to an extent. But I've done some other projects, which I think we'll touch on later, that have been that kind of open world or homebrew world to an extent. And that is where the players have had a lot more influence into the story. And I guess it's all been in character. So it hasn't been out of character, like, okay, this NPC does this, or this store or this village exists. It's things in character, but 100% the things that they've done, come up with, etc., have fully influenced the story.
How do you handle prep for your sessions? Are there certain things that you specifically get together, or do you do a lot of improv? What is your process for prepping for a session?
Yeah, I hate prep. I'll say that. It because I think I haven't um, figured out a way to do that efficiently. I focus on the wrong things. I'm a graphic designer by day, and I just love having a very aesthetic pleasing look to things. And so, I start to focus on the details, just maps and other things like that. And that sometimes draws more time than it should, probably. And then with running a module, though, it's generally trying to go through all that material, making notes, bullet points, trying to summarize that. And a lot of the stuff, too, has been, with the Star Wars games at least, has been from other systems. So there's conversion involved. And so you just need the story. You don't really need, the nuts and bolts, the mechanics. You just need that story. And then as long as you know the system you're playing, you just, make the adjustment as needed. So there's a lot of that where it's just bullet points of the story. And then over the year or two, I've been more loose with that, so that if the players want to do something different, there's the flexibility. But that's pretty much about how it's been with preparation in that regard.
Sure. And what system do you end up playing, or I guess running the most?
I would say, if looking back at my last 2 years to date, it would be Star Wars 5e, would be the one. But Savage Worlds is picking up because I've been playing and running that now quite a bit. I guess they're pretty equal right now, but that's been one of my favorites. I really really enjoy that system, and checking out some others, playing Play by Post with Mothership, which I really like, sci-fi horror RPG. And there's a lot of other little ones out there that I want to check out as well.
I haven't had anybody on that has talked about the Star Wars 5e. So do you want to just talk a little bit about that system?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Star Wars 5e, 2-3 years old now. I got in pretty young to it as well myself. Gentleman by the username of Gallifile started the conversion, and as I said, I was looking for that game in person a while ago, and the DM happened to be running Star Wars 5e. That's what I got into it, and found the Discord for it, and just kind of got involved with the project. Very community based. But the system itself, it's basically the fifth edition, Dungeons and Dragons fifth edition, and then flavored for Star Wars. But there's a lot beyond just that. There's some adjustments, rewrites to classes. The spells are called powers in that system. So you have powers, and you have force powers, of course, and then you have another section called tech powers for a split, just so it's not all force Jedis and whatnot doing the casting. Some options otherwise, and yeah, there's great flavor. Obviously, the weapons are changed. There's a massive list of species given in the Star Wars universe, everything that's out there. And but yeah, if you're familiar with 5e and you want to play Star Wars and you like 5e, this is a great system to jump into to kind of connect those together.
I know I've briefly looked at their website, but I've never gotten a chance to really do a deep dive on the rules and everything that they've done with the conversion yet, which I should probably get to, but just haven't had time.
Yeah, it's there is a lot there. As I said, if you're familiar with 5e, it would allow you to jump into it. But there is, I'll say that there's enough that has departed from traditional 5e that you if you were going to run a game, you'd want to dive in and make and see what is different, just so you're aware of it. But you certainly could still jump into it without not knowing anything, and I think get along. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think it does. Is it the best system for Star Wars? That's up for debate. But if you want to play, if you enjoy 5e and you want to play Star Wars, I think it does what it needs to do.
You also have the, large market share of people who have played 5th edition or probably maybe even exclusively played 5th edition. So as far as player base, it would be a little bit easier to convince them to, hey, let's go play the Star Wars version of 5th edition than maybe learning a completely new system.
Yeah, definitely. There are other Star Wars systems out there. I mentioned the old D20, the old D6. Uh, there was the next one after D20 was Saga Edition, which I think was close to 3.5 edition. And then the most recent one, Fantasy Flight, which I think that's the one you're using for your one shot, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and I haven't, I've looked over that one a little bit, but I haven't done a dive into that as all to really understand that system and whatnot, with the fancy dice and all that. It seems interesting, but yeah, to your point, if you know 5e already, you jump right into this one and you don't have to worry about that learning process.
Maybe you'll have to join the one shot so you can get a chance to check it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it lines up with your schedule, I know that's usually
Yeah. That's
the
the big
tricky
one.
thing.
Yep.
Um, are there any games that you haven't played but would like to play or run?
Yeah, lots of them, definitely. I have such a list of systems out there that especially as I said, when I was first getting into the hobby, that's what I was doing was just reading systems because I didn't have anyone to play with yet. I hadn't put myself out there to just join a random game, and so I said, all right, I'm just going to read through systems, see what I like, and because I wanted to try and play with my brothers. I've got three younger brothers. We always grew up playing games together, and that just never ended up working out. And of course, I would have defaulted to be the DM even back then. And but specifically, I did play Call of Cthulhu recently. Somewhat, I did. They have a one-on-one adventure which I ran, which is interesting. But I'd like to play more of a full-fledged camp, at least one shot with that. Into the Odd. I would like to check out. It's a kind of an old school style game, and there's a great maybe conversion or hack of it, I guess, called Mouse Ritter. It's just an adorable little game. Your mice. It has an amazing weapon system, and I've got plans to run that here in the holiday season coming up. Beyond that, yeah, I think that's there's probably a few other ones that stand out, but I don't think there's anything else major. I've kind of I don't really have any desire for Pathfinder, things like that. Any of some of the other big ones. I just I enjoy some of the indie games. I think those are fun. There's just so much out there to check out.
There are so many, and there's tons of Kickstarters all the time,
Hmm.
and there's just indie published stuff. I mean, I don't think it'd even be possible to get through everything out there. I
Oh,
mean,
absolutely,
there's
yeah.
just so, which is awesome, right? For the hobby to have, once you get into it, you can basically say, I want like this theme and this theme mashed together, and somebody's probably written a game for it.
Oh,
So,
absolutely,
which is just
yeah.
really fun.
Yep, and as I mentioned I'm playing Mothership. That's one of my newest ones, and that's it's definitely gaining steam now. They're getting a new Kickstarter here soon. Running that as play by post, but that one is super cool. Very interesting system, and one thing about having all these different systems too, as another kind of suggestion to DMs is even if you don't play these systems, read other systems. There's so many things that I have pulled from even just reading other systems and brought them into an existing game. So Savage Worlds and 5e, I've used elements between the two of those, or of these old school independent style games. I've seen things in there that I really enjoy, brought those in. Blades in the Dark, for example, they have like the clocks system from there, and I just love that feature. I've used that a few times. I mean, if you don't play them, that's fine, but I think checking out other systems for that reason alone to borrow mechanics and things, that's something I think anyone should do.
That's actually one of my favorite things about this podcast is getting to hear people talk about systems that I haven't played and some of the mechanics because I think all systems do certain things well and they do certain things less well. And
Hmm.
if you can kind of find the things that are just like a system does really well, like Blades does heists really well, and it's got that clocks mechanic, right? And stealing those into your D&D game when you need to run a heist or something is great. Are there specific mechanics that you want to talk about that you have pulled from one game and ported into another?
Hmm. Off the top of my head, like the clocks one is just that's at the forefront because I remember the first time using that, and I did. It was essentially kind of a temperature gauge that went up and down, and I didn't tell the players what it was. I had green at the top, red at the bottom, and they did a skill challenge, and they saw it on screen, and they did something, and the little meter went up or down, and they as it started going down, they're like, it was so cool. It was such a cool moment to sense that confusion, excitement, dread, everything of what was going on. So that was a super cool moment. So that one is always just sticks out to me. There's a lot in Savage Worlds that is very cool. Their chases is very neat. I mean, they use a deck of cards for initiative and a lot of other things, so there might be some translation issues there, but um, yeah, specifically, there's not many other that at least come right to mind specifically beyond the clocks. But yeah, I know I've taken some between those before.
I think it's probably a theme of the show that people that's one of the common themes is people will say, "Hey, you should read other things." So it's
Hmm.
always nice when um, it's something that I've been saying, and then it's nice when everybody else is kind of echoing that same sentiment. Um, could you talk a little bit about Mothership and maybe kind of the theme of the game and maybe some of the mechanics in that? I have not read that one.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm very new to it. I'm running a play-by-post game for it, which I have three brand new players as well. We're very learn as we go. I think play-by-post could work for it if we were more familiar with the system. I think that would help. But definitely, I think more of a live game because it's that sci-fi horror RPG. So high stress levels, definitely very lethal. So for example, the game we're playing, they were stowaways on a ship. They woke up from cryo sleep, and it was many years later than they thought it was. And their ship is basically heading into a star, and they need to correct that. And it's basically the adventure is them going through the ship and trying to get to the controls to deal with that situation. And along the way, they run into a lot of problems and things. There's a stress mechanic, which they have almost anything but maxed out. So if they come into a stressful situation, they have to roll on certain tables, like a panic table, to see if they can deal with that. One player went catatonic, and he's been out for like 5 rounds. I mean, it's
Oh
just
no.
been yeah. It's a super cool game. It has that indie vibe to it. If anything like the big influences would be like Alien, the movie Alien. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. That's definitely the standby is Alien is in all those movies is going to be what this is heavily influenced in that kind of fear, dread, horror of being trapped up in space as a marine or a scientist on a space station or a weird planet with crazy monsters or viruses, things like that. Very very fun. But yeah, the very cool system. If you're into that genre, I think it's a great one to check out.
I think now might be a good time to transition and talk a little bit about the many projects that you're working on. You want to tell us about those?
Absolutely, yeah. So my personally, I guess, with under as Todd Moonbounce, lately it's been running some of these other games, Deadlands. So I love streaming the games and hopefully putting on a good story and a good show uh, for the audience. I love the production side of it. As I mentioned, a graphic designer, so I like to create the overlays and all that little stuff, campaign titles, logos, and just managing that process. It's definitely a lot to manage while you're also DMing the game, but I've got it down where I think it's a pretty smooth process. And now I'm looking at getting to a little bit higher production with just better overlay setup, maybe some animated intro type things like that. And one thing that has kind of led to that, to fill that as well. Your recent guest Ryan Howard, him and I are co-cast members on Deadlands Hellgate trilogy that is produced by Valor Studios, and that has been a blast. It's definitely, they really go for that high production value within the RP and then the stream as well. So that's been a lot of fun, and that's been something for me to kind of strive to personally with my projects there. And then the other big project, though, outside of that, I'm co-founder, or creative director of the Dungeon Jedi Masters. So this is a podcast and so much more, all related to the Star Wars 5e system. So we started as a podcast, basically just talking about the system. Our first episode was what's different between Star Wars 5e and 5e. So that'd be a great one for anyone if they're interested. Maybe could use some updating as the system has changed over the year and whatnot. But beyond that, then we go through and have done just spotlights on different mechanics. We've done spotlights on each of the classes in the system. And we've done quite a few of DM-centric, generic DM-centric podcasts as well, just talking about running a game, things like that. And then, it's spun off into the streaming of our campaigns. We've got a YouTube channel that offers some helpful tutorial videos as well toward the system. And then eventually, just to help finance our hosting of a lot of that content, creation of that content, we did put out a Patreon. And as part of that Patreon, we offer some exclusive content, including adventures, modules, pre-written modules for the game, other things of that nature, just to kind of help out. So that's been a blast.
So those modules that you put out, those are for the Star Wars 5th edition?
Yes. Yep. So it's all specific to Star Wars 5e. It's basically 5e, so you could reflavor it if you wanted to bring it over potentially, just switching that up. But yes, it is specific to that. We'll do some of them that are specific, just like a little encounter with maybe a fun table or two, or a small situation. Just try it, little something for those that have been nice enough to support the project. One other project that I'm working on through Dungeon Jedi Masters as well is a narrative podcast that I've been doing that has been a blast. So we're recording season 2 right now, series 2, I should call it. The first one was called Vagrant Freighters. I had 3 individuals, 3 players, and we played the campaign, and then it's all just audio based. And then I went back through and cut all the mechanical play, the dice rolls and everything. And so what's left is just that narrative aspect. Throw in a little bit of sound effects and ambience there, and try to get that old radio show vibe. So when you listen back to that, not until like episode 3 did we really fully transition to that. Some of the first ones have some of the roles and things, but that was the end product, which was such a blast to have that end product. They're about an hour long. And it's just me narrating, and then the players are being their characters, and it's so much fun to do. It was a great story to tell, and so we're working on the next series, because it's not a continuation of this of Vagrant Freighters. It is called, I think we've settled on Scattered Choices will be the title of this one. Should be 6 episodes long. I have 2 players in that, and it's actually going to be a prequel. Or set before, not necessarily prequel, but set before Vagrant Freighters timeline, still within the same system, same universe. And then down the road, there might be potential for some crossover, which is cool. That's another aspect of building this world, and having all this stuff go on. So that's been a lot of fun, just to figure that out, because it's a different type of project as well. When we run that, there's a lot of we're very conscious of what we're doing, what we're creating. So we'll stop and 100% it's the dice and our role play dictates the story. But we might stop and say, hey, let's run that back and say it this way or do it this way just because it'll come out better. So just to have a little bit more polished project. You can imagine if that was in a regular game, that would maybe feel a little weird. But I think sometimes we do that. We kind of retcon and go back to things that we might just work out better. So, but that's been a lot of fun just to really focus on that narrative.
And how many episodes is that first season?
So Vagrant Freighters is 8 episodes total, all around that hour mark, a little shy of that. So it's I would say that it's a pretty easy thing to digest. Yeah, it ended pretty well, and I do plan on 1 maybe 2 more seasons of that as well.
And do you plan for those seasons to all be pretty short with, kind of like under 10 episodes each?
Yeah, I think so. The next one, so Scattered Choices, I've got 6 planned. I think that's what I'm going to stick to. And then probably look around that 8 again for Vagrant Freighters. Vagrant's going to be kind of the main one of this series, if you will. Yeah, it'll be around that. Given it's essentially only being an hour long each episode, you're looking at so Vagrant Freighters was about 2 to 3 sessions, really. Standard sessions, if you look to be about 3 hours in a normal session. So there's not a lot of combat involved. When it does, it's definitely a narrative aspect. It's there, but yeah, it's pretty short, but I still think we told a great story in the amount of time we had. And that's something that I'm kind of looking towards doing in future, like live games as well, is tight story arcs, 4, 6, 8 weeks, tell a story, do something different, come back to it if you want, and not this just kind of play until you get burnout kind of a thing.
Yeah, I've had multiple people come on and say setting like a limit to either the number of sessions or like a specific goal or something that like once you hit that, then you're done. And you can get these kind of short and sweet, kind of almost like mini campaigns. And then that lets everybody, when you get to the end of it, you can say, okay, that was really fun. We want to, renew it for another season essentially and keep playing. Or, maybe people are getting bored of their characters. They want to try something fresh or a different system or something. And then that's kind of a natural break where you can, okay, we can do something else, but we could even come back to it, 2 seasons from now if, we get the itch again or whatever. With these kind of mini seasons that you're doing, how do you plan out the story for this? Are these like pretty planned out arcs and then you're kind of playing through that, or how is that set up?
Yeah, so this one is very different. So I have there's an old setting guide from the old Star Wars D6 system that I'm using. It's in the Minos cluster, this group of systems way on the edges of the galaxy. And, there is some Imperial presence there, but it's basically all about the smugglers and the cargo runners and things like that. And so I use that as my base. I didn't want to spend time like trying to create a homebrew world. So we have this world ready to go. We have the planets. We have some key individuals, key organizations like that. And then we sat down, threw our players into that. We did some fun backstory connection tools there, which is something else we could touch on too. Backstory tools to link players together is such a blast to do. But we threw them in, and I had a little bit of a concept of, okay, here's where we're going to start. And then with this, as I mentioned earlier, my players, were just fantastic, and I rode the wave that they paved. So I had a starting point. We got into it, introduced a few characters, and based on their reactions and interactions and whatnot, the story developed naturally on its own. I would say the players created that story much more than I did, which was a blast though. And I think it came out really good because it gave me things to feed off and then I could create those directions.
And then when you're kind of wrapping up a session, do you have like a finale episode where things really kind of come to a close,
For the campaign as a whole.
or yeah, or like your seasons.
Yeah, the season. Yeah, so well, yes, there was so for Vagrant Freighters series 1, season 1, there definitely was a conclusion to that. So as we went through that, once we got about 3 episodes in, maybe 4, I was kind of outlining, all right, I want to end on 8. Um here's the plot lines, here's the storyline that I want to try and follow once that started to be established. And then said, okay, episode 5 is going to probably be this, 6 is probably going to be that, 7 is going to be that, 8 is our conclusion. We have, that once you get later on in the season, then then it has to start fitting that specific arc, that narrative, and things like that. So, but yeah, the ending definitely did have a conclusion. I think left some things open for later on, as you mentioned, if you want to come back to it, which I do now. It was a great project to finally wrap up. As you know from editing podcasts, that can be nuts. And a project like this was definitely that was not the fun part, but the end result was such a blast to you know to see come out of it. And now after the fact, I'm enjoying the new series, and then I can't wait to go revisit Vagrant as well because it was such a blast to do.
I do want to circle back to editing the podcast in a little
Yeah.
bit, but let's talk about the backstory tools that you mentioned first.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that any of that you're familiar with yourself?
No, not at all.
Yeah, so I was introduced with these tools called Backstory cards by Ryan Macklin. They're just essentially a little playing card style, and they have prompts on them. And then they have some other things like an arrow and a number. So what you do is different ways you can use these. Out of the box, you start with a table. I believe it has four columns, 3 rows, and there's a person, place, events. There's one other in there that's in those 4 categories, and you go through with your players, and you write down, say, all right, we kind of know what our world is. Give me a person, and you just whatever you want that to be. All right, that is Mako now. That's a player. Mako is a Twi'lek, and they run a cantina. All right, you put that on the list, and then go through and you create all this, these various things here. Then you start drawing the cards, and you'll get a card that says a player and yourself got into a fight at location. And then all those things correspond to what you just created. So there's an arrow on there to say like the person to your left or to your right or whatever. And that's the person involved in this co-op, if you will. And then it says location, and it'll have a number on the card. So like location number 2, you look at your grid you made, location number 2. Okay, that was the, old warehouse. And there's things there's solo things, there's group events. I mean, it was such a cool experience because we drew a few cards and we already created these connected stories between each other. And we were able to jump in, right away. And the players had these backstories to rely on. It wasn't like, oh, we're just going to start coming up with stuff. And that helped the RP, I think, a lot too off the bat.
Yeah, I can see where that would help kind of shape some of those relationships. One thing that I think, how do I want to say this? Having unlimited open options can be more limiting than having a couple of concrete things that you can just build off of.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's interesting. So it must have a thing that says like, okay, you need to write down 5 locations and 5 NPCs and or something like that, because it sounds like all of the cards just like they almost do the random rolling for you, right? Like it just says,
Yes.
okay,
Yep.
this player to your left and location 2, and yeah, that's really neat. I've seen other products where it's just like either pick or roll or something on a
Mhm.
table, but not ones where you kind of make the table ahead of time and then the cards tell you what the combinations are.
Absolutely, yeah, and of course, this is going to be for one of your homebrew type game. If you're running, you can use it outside of that. If you're running a module, you can certainly use this, but you just have to know what's involved. And you, as a DM, might have to come up with those things off the hand, unless you're going to allow the players to kind of go off the rails here and there. Otherwise, you're going to have to write in some of those connections ahead of time so that when they do draw these cards, maybe they do get a connection in the story. Of course, you don't want to spoil things, so you have to keep that in mind. But still definitely usable in either way, in a blast, and it's fun to just create that stuff with each other as well.
Yeah, I think that would have come in handy in a lot of the games that I ran because the characters never really had a great sense of why are we necessarily together? Like we're all
Hmm.
kind of a bunch of random people with very different powers and origins. So
Yeah, you get a lot of individualistic, I think. I've played in games where you were 4 or 5 just individual heroes doing your thing, It wasn't like, "We're in this together," and I think when you really create this connected backstories, even if it's just, 1 or 2 people, you're not connected with everyone, but you're gonna have a connection at least with one other person, it definitely creates that bond that you're talking about, and then when you go forward in the story, it's not just, "I have my selfish reasoning for doing this, and you have yours."
Um, can we talk about the editing of the podcast now? How
Yeah.
long did it take to basically if you know this, from start to finish of like recording an episode or recording a session and then turning that into like a finished uh, product that could be released as an episode? How long did it take to do all of that?
A long time. Um, yeah, so with Vagrant Freighters, so we are the Dungeon Jedi Masters podcast is about between 30-45 minutes. That's what we try to keep at. And I'm sure, Brock, from doing this, what that involvement is, because it's not as involved. You're probably going to have to cut some things out here and there. But with Vagrant Freighters, a whole different animal. One, we try and record about an hour and a half. I like to have about, I can kind of gauge, because I want it to come down to that hour mark, just under that. But that's what I aim for. So because there's a lot, one, there's dice rolls, there's just general discussion in between there. So hour 15, hour 20, hour 30, because I know I'm going to be cutting quite a bit out. If we have combats, which I do want to touch on as well, if we can squeeze it in, but combat, that's going to be even longer because there's a lot more involved with that. So I've easily spent 3-4 hours, going back through, because you're just listening to that, editing it, making sure that, the voices make sense with each other, that the pacing of the language, so my first pass is cutting out all the junk, making sure it sounds good. Then I go back through and then I add in some of the ambience and stuff, and that stuff's a little quicker, gets it going. But yeah, it's involved, definitely.
Yeah, so you're really doing like two passes on the edit, not including just the time it takes to record, get set up and record a session.
Right.
Um, yeah, that's actually something that I would like to do with my upcoming one shot, just to try that style of editing. Um,
Hmm.
I think it would be interesting, and I've wanted to mess around with throwing sound effects and background music and stuff in. Um, so I'm hopefully going to record that one shot. Although since it'll be just kind of whoever on the server wants to play, we probably won't like have that be the main focus of the one shot. The
Right.
main focus will be just playing and having fun, and then I'll just go back in later and
Hmm.
edit.
And that's certainly doable. And adding that extra stuff, I think, is such a blast. And I think this is, potentially a great jumping off point, though. And it's something that even in general, in any general game, outside of trying to have this, radio show style game, is being narrative in your actions, especially combat. I think combat's one of the hard things. And what we found with doing this uh, show, Vagrant Freighters, was when we got to the combat, we needed to be very obviously purposeful with combat, because I'm cutting all the dice rolls out, and if they don't say anything else, then nothing happens. So what we did, and this is a suggestion I would tell DMs to give to their players, is tell me your actions up front. Be on top of that. Any player should be on top of what they want to do on their turn. So, all right, I'm going to move here. I'm going to take this action, this bonus action, etc. Do that. Do your rolls quickly. Figure out if you hit, miss, etc. And then in character, describe what just happened. And then you basically kind of go back through and do that again. So you make your actions, the mechanics, and then you flavor it in narrative, because I think there's lots of opportunity to bring in some cool story points in that. Maybe as you're narrating your attack, something happened that makes you think of a memory or something else, or you see your counterpart getting attacked, and there's just these feelings and emotions you can bring up within character that I think adds so much more to the game rather than just I roll to hit, things like that.
Sure. And kind of waiting to see what the dice roll is too, I feel like would help to have a be because otherwise it would be more segmented, right? It would be like, okay, I described my setup to the action, like I raise my rifle and fire a couple of shots, which is better than just saying I shoot at the guy, but
Hmm.
also it's not really a whole lot of narrative either. And then so you have that kind of setup and then um the result. Okay, now we know what the dice did. Now I can kind of describe like if I hit or not. But then like what you're doing is okay, real quick, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to attack them. Here's my roll. Okay, I got my result. I missed. And now you have that chance to go in and narrate the whole action
Right.
as kind of the result versus just kind of the two segments.
Hmm. And it's fun to do it that way. And another kind of thing to touch on with this is play by post has been another good way of doing this, because in play by post you're going to have generally your RP channel and then your dice channel. So in combat you go through that list: movement, action, bonus action, etc. Excuse me. And after you do that, then you go to the RP channel and you write out the results, of that. So if you fail, you can describe that. You get to flavor, why did you fail? You tripped over a crate, or you did this, the sun got in your eyes, and that's just so much better than, oh, you just miss.
Yeah, and this is something that I could see myself stealing just for in, regular games, even not even considering recording it for like a
Mhm.
podcast, but just, you know, the DM being in the DM mode and after they do a roll, just basically turn to the player and say, "Okay, describe why this roll makes sense or explain to me how this you failed this role." I
Yeah.
think it's as simple as that, um, and then maybe a way to engage some of your players as well a little bit more in the narrative.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and it can be tough. Sunday I had a game, and I caught myself because it kinda got towards the end of the session, and we were just grinding through combat. It was roll, go, we didn't, and I try to flavor, so after things happen and I'll narrate the results, so you pulled up your rifle and you took a shot, but it careened off the armor and didn't penetrate, and I'll throw some of that flavor in it as well. But I think if we took more of a conscious effort and said, okay, let's go through your actions real quick. Tell us what it is. Because I have a fighter who's shooting 4 shots a turn, kind of a thing. And so up front it would just be like, all right, get those all out of the way. Okay, you made 3 out of the 4. Explain that. Boom. And then if they narrate what happens, tell us maybe something cool happened on that 4th shot that missed for some reason, and that's a cool story point to make. So absolutely, in a regular game, regardless of the intention of trying to have a recorded session, that's just would be something to try and to push as well.
Yeah, I can think of a couple of players that I have specifically that I think that would really benefit. Back on the Star Wars 5th edition for a second, I know that 5th edition D&D in general, a lot of the abilities and stuff are super combat focused. Like most of the things on a character sheet as you level up relate to combat. Is
Right.
is that similar in Star Wars 5th edition, or did they add other powers that are maybe more towards the like social and exploration aspects of the game?
I would say it's more the former. It's gonna stick pretty close to traditional 5e. And actually, I might say that there's a good bit of power creep in Star Wars 5e. One example, you get a feat at level 1. That's just something they built in. So right off the bat, you're already a bit stronger. And then there's just a lot of other features that just add some power creep to the game. So it's something that you need to be aware of as a DM. It can be tough, especially in the later tiers of leveling. 8, 9, 10, etc. If you get that far, it can be pretty tough to build a challenging encounter. So, kind of specifically to your question, I think that it still heavily does focus on the combat. And whether that's just the nature of the fifth edition system, or not. As I mentioned at the beginning, I prefer a narrative game. I prefer that social game. So I fifth edition works for that. It certainly works for that, but I think you really have to make sure you have the players that want to play that style of game, and you utilize the features that are there for that. I guess actually, to illustrate that further, in Vagrant Freighters and in Scattered Choices, the system that we're using honestly doesn't matter. And in fact, fifth edition might not be the perfect system for it, but because we're not using a lot of the features to tell the story, because it is so heavily narrative based. Because as you asked the question, they are definitely going to be a little bit more combat focused.
And then one other questions I had about that was how does the system handle force sensitive versus non force sensitive players?
Yeah, so it does that very well. It's balanced across the classes. So there's 3 native force classes, and then there is everyone else is going to be otherwise. There is an engineer, which is a tech casting class, so just a different caster, but in a different way. And there's pretty close to the uh, similar versions to 5e. So Berserker is the barbarian. You have the rogue is an operative in Star Wars 5e. Fighter is fighter, and then you have the other classes though. So Consular, Sentinel, and Guardian are the force classes in Star Wars 5e. Guardian is going to be your paladin, similar. But as far as the balance between them, it's very good, because I think that you have to suspend that concept, that belief that Jedi are super powerful. You have to pull away from the movies and all the other media, and you have to say, okay, like, you can to an extent go toe to toe with this other person in a certain way, and because it has to be for balance for the game, otherwise everyone would be playing Jedi and it just wouldn't be any fun. So I think it does that pretty well.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about balance, but at the same time, I mean, how is the balance between like playing a fighter and a wizard in D&D? I mean,
Right.
wizards are already going to have a ton of powers and spells that they can use to deal with the fighters. So, and I know people have talked about that. Like if you play a casting class, you just are generally a little bit more powerful in if you're in the right circumstances, right? I mean, hand to
Mhm.
hand combat, wizard's probably not going to win, but other situations, the wizard has a leg up. And then even in the like movies and stuff, I mean, I kind of agree with. Or I don't think you necessarily need to uh, lower your expectations. The characters in the movies are like 20th level probably, or
Yeah,
a
that's fair.
really high level, right? Like you're not playing like Darth Vader or
Right.
Yoda, right? You're playing like the Padawans and the people at lower levels, and even some of the bounty hunters and stuff that aren't force sensitive in the films can go toe to toe with the
Mhm.
Jedi as well. So it really just kind of depends on where they're at skill wise or level wise, almost, and what tools they have available to them.
Yeah, definitely. All comes into play there, and it's going to be on you as a DM, as players as well, to create in a way that is going to be fun, and allow that to come out and make sense. If you want to do something crazy and have super OP Jedi characters, absolutely you can do that. So that's one thing with these style games with tabletops is you get to make it however you want.
What is the typical like level cap that's in the game? I know like with fifth edition, a lot of groups never get past like 10th level. Is that kind of similar in Star Wars
Um,
5e?
I couldn't. Well, we did a couple surveys to ask kind of where people were at least. I I like the 3 to 6 range. I've gone outside of that. My current campaign is hitting 8 right now, and we will be doing we're coming up to the finale. We'll be jumping up to 10 just to finish out the game. We're going to do level 8 for a Halloween special here end of the month, and then our last couple sessions will be level 10 just to round off. But I enjoy like the 3, 4, 5, 6. Just you're getting some of those features, and it doesn't get out of control. So I think sometimes there can be choice paralysis and things. In the game I play in, same thing. DM Tegan, he likes kind of that mid range, 5, 6, 7, 8 himself. But we will be doing, just because it's fun to do, because you don't often get there. Our finale will be level 20. We've done it before too. It's pretty crazy. There's so much going on. So that's what we see. I think that's generally where you see it as well. I wouldn't say, I don't know if it matches 5e's average or not, traditional 5e, but I'd say it might be close.
Sure. And you actually mentioned something that I was going to ask earlier. It sounds like you have a holiday special. Do you typically run holiday-based games?
Not well. I guess I have a little bit, yeah. Halloween is one of my personally just one of my favorite holidays, and as I got into tabletops, I'm going to do a Halloween session. I have to, and I just haven't got around to it. And this year, I wanted to run a bunch of games, and it just my schedule's been busy and haven't really gotten the players involved. So I'm still doing my Sunday game that falls on Halloween. So we're going to do a special adventure just for Halloween for that. One of our free Patreon adventures, so anyone can get to it. It's on our Patreon, though. I wrote a Halloween special based on an old Ewok cartoon that is centered around Halloween, the kind of Star Wars version of Halloween. And so all the basically kind of like the council, they're called on the Star Wars 5e Discord, the moderators and the developer team. We did a holiday one shot, and I basically redid Jingle All the Way with Arnold Schwarzenegger, but this was Jabba All the Way. And so Jabba the Hutt's child, I forget his name, but he wanted, instead of Turbo Man in the Jingle All the Way, it was Turbo Mandalorian. And so they had to go and get the Turbo Mandalorian for Jabba the Hutt's kid for Life Day. We've done a Life Day adventure. So yes, you definitely do some holiday related things. I think it's a great time to come up with a cool theme, and always a good time. I definitely have some stuff planned for like the December holiday season as well. So
I really like the idea of taking that Jingle All the Way and then and then reskinning it with all of the Star Wars stuff. That's awesome.
yeah, it was a blast. I had 7 players. It was nuts. But it was a special thing we did. We had all the community come out. We did some giveaways and things. So it was kind of a special one-off thing, but it was a good time. And yeah, and then I know we're kind of getting to the end here, but just to throw one more thing in, reskinning things there, like your favorite movie, reskin it. People may know, but it doesn't matter. It's probably a good story. And that's another tip I think is definitely use material that you already know of.
I ran a one shot, and I basically took the Lord of the Rings scene when they go into Moria and go through the door and the with the Balrog and everything. And
Okay.
and 2 of the players had not seen Lord of the Rings, so like they're just oblivious. And then one of the other players is like, "Is this the plot from Lord of the Rings? Like, is this that scene?" It's like, "Yep, yes, it
Nice. Yeah.
is."
Yeah, I think it's cool because, like, regardless if that was in 5e and it's fantasy, it's probably going to be pretty similar. But you get to live that. Like, why wouldn't you want to do that? So, regardless if you recognize what the inspiration is, now you get to play it out, and you get to play it out how you want. So, I think even then, if people recognize, still not a big deal.
Yeah, and sometimes that one I was like super on the nose. Like the riddle was the same, the monsters were
Nice.
the same, so like it was just a complete ripoff.
Yeah.
But even if you just reskinned some of it and just kind of filed the names off,
Mhm.
You can get away with a lot, and people don't always, unless you're like super specific about something. Some of those plots and stuff can go kind of unnoticed without people realizing what you're stealing from. So definitely steal from your favorite books and TV shows and all of that
Mhm.
fun stuff. Cool. Well, I think we can probably start to wrap up. So, Todd, where can we find you?
Yeah, so at Todd Moonbounce on Twitter, Todd Moonbounce on Twitch. Those are going to be my main 2 points of contact. Also, be sure to check out Dungeon Jedi Masters. Best way for that is dungeonjedimasters.com, and that will have links to all of our content, our podcast, Twitch channel, which will go back to mine, Todd Moonbounce. We have our Instagram, which has once or twice a week we post plot hooks and npcs and items and things like that on Instagram, Twitter, just for conversations. We do have a merch store if you want a Dungeon Jedi Masters t-shirt. I think there's one other thing in there, but then of course our Patreon as well. So there's a lot of freebies on that, and then also if you get involved and you enjoy what we're doing and want to support us, you can do so that way. So dungeonjedimasters.com.
Awesome. Thank you. It was a blast talking to you, Todd.
You as well, Brock. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Dungeon Masters Toolkit podcast. You can find links to all of the products and resources that we talked about on the show in the show notes. And if you'd like to join the community or find out how to be on the show, check out our subreddit or join us in our Discord server.